Now that we've heard from Gary Lafray and Bill Braniff about the Global Terrorism Database and how they define terrorism and collect data for the database, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Global Terrorism Index. My name's Daniel Hyssop. I'm the Research Manager at the Institute for Economics and Peace. We're a think tank that specialises in trying to measure peace and better understand what drives it and what creates it. Every year we publish the Global Peace Index. It's a ranking of 162 countries of the world by how peaceful they are. Terrorism is actually a very important part of that index. But another one of our major research projects is our Global Terrorism Index, and that is based on the START Global Terrorism Database. And that's what I want to make really clear, is that we're talking about the Global Terrorism Index, not the Global Terrorism Database. Slightly different things. The main reason why we're doing this research is because we really want to provide the public, civil society, researchers and other public policy makers with an evidence base to better understand what actually creates terrorism and to foster a more, meaningful discussion about the true drivers and root causes of terrorism. Bill and Gary have talked about how myth-making is a really important part of how terrorists try and succeed, how they communicate their political and ideological goals. Obviously, the more that terrorists can widen the gap between real and perceived risks, the more that they can achieve their goals. And that's where we think data has a really important role to play in bridging that gap and actually communicating and contextualizing what the real risks are in what is often a very sensationalist public discourse and highly emotive one as well. We developed the GTI because an index serves two purposes from a research and a communications point of view. From the comms point of view, it gives us a very simple ordinal ranking, a ranking from 1 to 162 of the countries that suffer from the most and least terrorism. And so that just tells the general public where we have the most terrorism and where we have the least terrorism. And it's simple to understand, and that's a really important thing from a communications perspective. Obviously, more detailed data in the GTD is available to understand what tactics terrorists are using, which weapons they use, which groups are committing which terrorist acts, etc. But what we believe is that it's important not just to engage counter-terrorism experts and researchers and public policy makers, but it's also important to engage the broader public and certainly the media, who have a very important role in communicating where terrorism happens and why it happens. From a research and policy point of view, the existence of an index provides a couple of things. One, it's a very useful cross-country database that is comparable to other statistical data sources. So we use, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but we use statistical techniques to make the index more comparable to other socio-economic variables to facilitate better research around what are the root causes and drivers of terrorism. From a conceptual point of view, the index is useful for a number of reasons. One, terrorism is a multidimensional concept. You can't measure it just by one indicator. We measure it with 4 indicators in the GTI. We take 4 aspects of the GTD and put them into a composite measure. The other thing is that terrorism and its effect is felt over time. We note that the impact of a terrorist attack can take many years or months and years for it to go away. Secondly, whilst measuring the impact of a terrorist attack and the number of people who might be killed in an attack is very useful, you can have many impactful events that don't actually kill many people but injure a large number of people. So a really good example of that is the Boston bombings. Didn't kill many people, but hugely impactful psychologically in terms of the number of people it injured and obviously where it happened. So in this sense, the GTI is really trying to measure something latent which can't really be directly observed, and that's the ongoing psychological impact of terrorism. The Global Terrorism Index uses 4 indicators to measure the impact of terrorism in 162 countries: the number of terrorist attacks, the number of people killed, the number of people injured, and the level of property damage. The indicators are weighted to reflect impact, so in this case, death has a greater impact than property damage. The sum of these indicators is the raw GTI score. Once the score is calculated, a 5-year weighted average is then applied to take into account the lingering effect that terrorist attacks can have on a society in terms of fear and security response. 52% of the total score is for the current year, 26% the previous, 13% 2 years prior, 6% 3 years ago, and 3% 4 years ago. That means that in 2013, a country's score will reflect the impact of terrorism from an attack that took place in 2009. This is designed to reflect the ongoing but diminishing psychological impact a terrorist attack can have. But we know that the impact of terrorism is not evenly distributed. There are a few countries that suffer the majority of terrorism, while many countries do not experience terrorism at all. We account for this in the methodology of the index by applying a base 10 logarithmic banding system between 0 and 10 at 0.5 intervals. That might sound complicated, but it means that we are better able to evenly distribute scores so that countries are not all clustered at the top or at the bottom of the index. What's important is that by combining these methods of scoring, weighting and banding, we make the terrorism index a relative indicator of impact. A terrorist incident that kills one person is likely to have a greater psychological impact in a country with no terrorist incidents than somewhere where terrorism is a regular occurrence. So how does this work in the Global Terrorism Index? Let's take the example of India. India had 624 terrorist attacks in 2013 that killed 404 people, injured 719 people, and scored 158 for property damage. After applying the weights described, the total raw score is calculated at 2,512. Then, the 5-year weighted average is applied so that the score for 2013 takes into account the impact of terrorist attacks in previous years. Now the weighted score for India is 2,462. That score is then banded. The final GTI score for India in 2013 is then 7.86 out of 10. This score ranks India 6th in the Global Terrorism Index. What we can learn from the Terrorism Index. So that is how we construct the Global Terrorism Index, but what are the results and what can we learn from it? In 2013, the country most impacted by terrorism is Iraq, followed by Afghanistan and Pakistan. In fact, 82% of all people killed by terrorist attacks last year were in just 5 countries. There were 39 countries that had zero impact of terrorism in 2013. Now Gary and Bill have already covered some of the key trends in terrorism in this module, so let's look at what we call correlates of terrorism. One important aspect of this research is that it allows us to compare the index to other socio-economic data so that we can start to understand the sorts of environments associated with terrorism. What we found is that there's 3 key factors related to terrorism that have the highest statistical significance. 1. Measures of social hostility. This includes a lack of intergroup cohesion and group grievances. 2. High levels of state-sponsored violence, such as extrajudicial killings. 3. High levels of violence and crime, including perceptions of criminality and violent demonstrations. Interestingly, there are several key measures that are not related to terrorism. These include poverty measures, as well as other economic development measures such as GDP. Mean years of schooling and life expectancy are also not associated with terrorism. The Global Terrorism Index aims to shift the global debate around terrorism and counter-terrorism strategies to a more informed and fact-based discussion. Given how much media attention is actually given to terrorist attacks and to terrorism today, we really feel it's crucial that our research and the data that the GTD provides is available not just to counter-terrorism experts and governments, researchers and policymakers, but also to members of the general public and to the media, because the media obviously plays a very important role in determining public opinion. So how do we actually make a really complex composite index with over 8,900 data points accessible? 2 ways. Firstly, we place a huge importance on getting our research into mainstream media. This is to ensure that the facts reach those whose understanding of terrorism is informed largely by the same media. The 2014 Global Terrorism Index made it to the homepage of the worldwide news outlets like the BBC, Guardian and Sky News, and was one of the top 20 articles on the New York Times website the day of the launch. CNN journalist and author Fareed Zakaria dedicated his program to an in-depth analysis of the report and what it means for US foreign policy. The second way we do this is by making all of our research and data accessible via our website, Vision of Humanity. The interactive map provides a heat map of the state of terrorism around the world. The information is accessible in layers so that the map will be engaging for both someone who is curious but also for a terrorism expert. You can see the full list of ranks, explore the state of terrorism over time, click on a country to see how it performs on all of the indicators, and click on another country to compare its levels of terrorism. Selecting one of the indicators will show you how the world performs according to that particular factor. Of course, if you would like to go beyond the index and explore the trends, correlates, as well as an assessment of terrorist groups and countries at risk of an increase of terrorism, you can download the Terrorism Index report, catch up on the highlights and more.